Welcome all to, we're now to our Valuation Lab chat series. We are now officially switching over to dockside chat because the ice is now off of Lake Minnetonka. And yeah, that's Minnetonka behind me, sorry. Any case, so Tom Gunderson and I are pleased to welcome Nadim from CVRx, and Tom will be handling introductions. Just as a little bit of backstory, as everyone knows, we are 30 minutes on the record and 30 minutes off the record. We'll take Q&A as they come along after Tom and I ask a few questions here. And the other piece is, of course, this is supported in part by the Medical Industry Leadership Institute and also the Carlson Global Institute and our brand new Global Medical Industry MBA. So those of you have friends looking for a great value for an overseas MBA program, we are your one-stop shopping solution. And with that, I'll pass the baton over to Tom.
Great, thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody. We are very pleased to have with this Value Lab sponsored chat today, dockside or fireside, depending upon where you are in the world, with Nadim Yared. Nadim is the CEO of CVRx, and I've known this company for a long time. Nadim's known it even longer, and it's an example of, in my opinion, of the medical device trials and tribulations, but eventually getting to success. And we'll talk a little bit about how we define success here. But before we do that, just make sure everybody's on the same page. Nadim, could you kind of give us a thumbnail, 5-minute or less history of you and CVRx?
Sure, Tom, and thank you for the invite. So excited to be here, and thanks to the university for sponsoring it. Steve, thank you as well. So the story of CVRx started in 2001, and before I go through it, let me talk a little bit about myself. Before joining CVRx, I ran a division for Medtronic, another large medtech company based in Minnesota. And prior to Medtronic in the 90s, I worked at GE Medical. So right out of college, I joined GE Medical in the research division out of Paris, developing software for them. Had held multiple jobs with GE. I was good at engineering, actually, so good that they did not want me to move to marketing. I had to take a year sabbatical, do my MBA at INSEAD, the school in France, and then go back to GE in the dark side of marketing. CVRx started in 2001 out of an incubator called Protostar. Protostar is the child of two legends in Minnesota, Tom Heckner and Dale Spencer. Dale Spencer unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. Dale created a couple of interventional cardiovascular companies in Minnesota, SciMed that became Boston Scientific, and EV3 that became Covidien and then Medtronic. They tasked at the time a researcher by the name of Dr. Rob Keeval to investigate carotid stenting. Carotid stenting is a spring that will go inside the carotid. And during Rob's research, he found out that every time they inflated the balloon in the carotid, blood pressure will go down. So he tried to figure out a way to lower blood pressure using that mechanism of action electrically. And that led to a patent, then the spin-off that became CVRx, and then the first clinical trials, first human treated with the therapy in Switzerland in 2004. And she's still alive with our device in her body for hypertension. And then the first decade was all about treating blood pressure. And we did a large trial in the United States. And in 2010, we got the results from this trial, and it was not very successful. We had to go back to the drawing boards to redesign the product. What was not successful with the product was the safety of the procedure. So we had to go back and design a smaller, much less invasive, so a minimally invasive approach to implant these electrical device in the neck to stimulate the baroreceptor. Let me take a minute and explain the mechanism of action. I think people here might be intrigued about this. We've known now for many decades that massaging of the carotid artery reduces blood pressure, reduces heart rate, induces sleep. The mechanism is simple. We have, each of us, human being, in our carotid wall, stretch fibers called baroreceptors. With every beat of the heart, they stretch. By stretching, they send neurochemical signaling to the brain. The brain counts those signaling and derive from this information the flow of blood feeding the brain. Now remember, Our brain is a paranoid organ. It needs to be perfused, oxygenated properly before any other organ in the body. So its priority is to ensure that the blood flow go to the brain to perfuse or oxygenate the muscles, the brain cells properly first. So those sensors are like a thermostat. They tell the brain how much blood is going through it. Now, if you want to cool your bedroom or your office right now, light a match under your thermostat. The heat from the match will trick the thermostat. It cools down your bedroom or your office. We're doing the same. We use electricity, we activate those stretch fibers, we make them fire more neurochemicals. The brain is tricked into believing there's too much blood flow, so it slows things down. That mechanism called the baroreflex is well documented, and it reduces the sympathetic tone, which is the fight or flight mechanism in the body, and increases the parasympathetic tone, which is the rest and digest. Now, we as humans, but also as our ancestors could be animals, right? We have this fight or flight mechanism that would allow us to recruit more energy, to escape a danger, or to climb a flight of stairs, or to fall in love. That same mechanism that makes the heart beat, the cheeks to become a little bit, pink or red, and so forth. That's the sympathetic system. That's the gas pedal. We like to be able to step on the gas, but when the traffic light goes to red, you cannot keep your foot on the gas pedal. You'll kill your engine. That is what happens with patients suffering from this deregulation that leads to high blood pressure, heart failure, chronic kidney disease, and so forth. Because their body is stepping on the gas pedal 24 hours a day, not only 1 or 2 hours a day. That's where our device comes in. We stimulate those baroreceptors electrically, trick the brain that would reduce the sympathetic tone, so basically removing the foot from the gas pedal and slow things down. So I was talking about the history of CVRx, 2001 to 2010, first generation device, bulky, invasive. We failed the safety endpoint. We had to go back to the drawing boards and make a decision. Do we double down on high blood pressure? Or by then we started feeling good about going after heart failure. Heart failure is a more morbid disease, more symptomatic. Patients suffer from heart failure. They can't climb stairs. They sometimes cannot even walk to their mailbox. So it has a heavier human burden on the function of the patients, on one hand. On the other hand, we looked at the competitive landscape, and Medtronic and other companies were investing heavily in hypertension with renal denervation and others. On top of this, Medtronic, Boston Scientific, and Abbott, so Guidant and St. Jude back then, had developed products for heart failure, but we knew back by 2010 that those products will only work in a smaller sliver of the heart failure patient population, those patients that have a dyssynchrony between the left side and the right side of the heart. So the 70% of patients suffering from heart failure cannot be treated with the Medtronic cardiac resynchronization therapy. They needed something else. That's when we decided in 2010, go back to the drawing board, redesign the product, start doing clinical trial. We did a phase 1 study in Italy, a phase 2 study in the United States and Germany, and then the phase 3 pivotal trial that led to an FDA approval in 2019.
So it all sounds so easy when you say, gee, we started this in 2004 and now it's 2019. We got FDA approval. You also got a IPO last year. And it's just textbook. But part of what we want to do in these chats is get a little bit more of the behind the scenes kinds of things that were going on. Particularly, we've talked about the fact that this wasn't just a start here and easy ramp up kind of thing. Nadim, can you talk a little bit about some of the barriers that got in the way and also how that impacted you and CVRx from the standpoint of funding?
Yeah, sure. So, they say better be lucky than good, right? And we were very lucky at one moment in time. But that was not enough. We had to be good as well. We got lucky in 2007 and 8 when we raised more money than we needed. In July of 2008, we raised a second round of financing, and we had at the time about $140 million in the bank. So for a startup in medtech to have so much money, it was obscene and it was stupid. And people told me in my face that it was stupid, that I was diluting my employees, my shareholders, myself, and so forth. A month later, August 29, 2008, the financial crisis hit. Suddenly, I moved from being the most stupid CEO in the room to the smarter CEO in the room, who really timed the financing well to weather the storm. And we were able to weather two storms with this money. The first one is the financial crisis, and the second is failing a trial and having to go back and restart the company. So that was one thing, Tom. However, when we say stop the company and restart, it's very hard. Number one, you have to tell your friends that you brought in from other companies that, folks, I have to make a tough decision here. I need to ask you to leave. That's the hardest decision. Then you need to pick up the phone and call your customers, so physicians, and some of the patients, and tell them, sorry, folks, the trial did not meet the endpoint. This will not be approved. We may need to explant your device. And sorry, doc, you'll have to go and tell your patients the same thing. Those are very, very hard. And as a CEO, you'll feel at a moment that you're alone and every single thing in the world is against you. You know, you can't look around saying somebody's supporting you. It's like everything is polarized, but against you, not with you. But you have those images in the office or on your computer and those videos of those patients, what they told you, how much they benefited from the therapy. And you go back to those and that'll give you a second wind and you refresh energy and you go back at it. One of the hardest thing actually for us was to convince ourselves that our team is solid. So the small kernel of the team that stayed behind was solidly involved, engaged, committed to the mission. Not a single person left. And that was, if you ask me, you know, back in July of 2010, when we did the first decision, you know, start reducing the size of the company, what was the highest element of risk? I would say retention of those that I need to stay with me to restart the company. And that worked very, very well because of the mission, because of that focus on the patients, because what some of those patients and their spouses told us. We had another situation, Tom, that happened a few years later. Actually, two difficult situations. One was in 2013, we're raising a round of financing, almost got to the end. And another one in October of 2018. When we were doing the heart failure pivotal trial, we unblinded the data. So we're happy we enrolled the trial, got the 6-month data, getting ready to pop the champagne open, unblinded data, and whoops. There is a big issue in the data that led me and our board of director and the senior staff to conclude that this is probably the end. So we went and met with FDA and told FDA, sorry, folks, we'll have to shut down the company because we know you will ask us to run yet another trial that will cost yet another $100 million, take another 5 years, and there is no appetite anymore in the market for this. And FDA, to their credit, the head of the cardiovascular division at FDA, to his credit, he said, wait. What are you doing here? We've waited 50, 60, 70 years for this to come. And if you go, nobody will pick this up. And by the way, a lot of trials, when we unblind them the first time, we see issues, we work together and we find solutions. And I at the time, I asked FDA, I needed a stronger commitment than this. And they agreed to dedicate a couple of their best statisticians to work with us almost over 24 hours a day to help us find what the issue is and what could be a solution that is acceptable statistically speaking. And we found a solution, and 6 months later, April 2019, we did the second unblinding. Everything looked great, and FDA approved our product in a record 3.5 months. So by August of 2019, we were approved. Now, in October of 18, when I told our board we were unblinding the data next week, we'll get approved before the end of 19. That was the schedule. We end up getting approved 4 months ahead of the schedule, despite starting to shut down the company in October of 18. So that was another accomplishment, Tom. And it wasn't easy. We needed a lot of luck, but also the product worked. That's number one. the technology worked. We had great data. And number two, we had the right team in place to work with the right, I would say, parties that are working with us. So physicians, patients, the regulators, FDA, and so forth, and investors to go through this. Sorry, I'm blabbering a little bit here. Maybe confuse here the audience with two stories overlapping.
No, I like it, and thanks for the look under the tent there. Many of us, I can see on the screen, many of us have been around med tech for a while, and I have to say that last example you gave is not the FDA that was around 10, 15, 20 years ago. They were not as willing to work with companies. So that's encouraging to hear that in 2018, you think you're going to close the company down. They're going to ask for more data from a clinical trial, and you actually work together. That ends up being a win-win for FDA and CVRx, but also a win for the investors, the patients, the doctors. It's a hard story, but it's a good story. Steve, what kind of things do you want to ask Nadim?
Well, first, as a comment, like you're the absolute picture of tenacity. My God, so thank you for everything you've done. I guess my question is, I just looking at some of the folks that are in this chat, and others will listen to this recording of it. I mean, I guess one question is, when did you get the MBA? And actually, the question really is, for those that are like maybe 10, 15 years younger than you, I mean, you made it, but at any particular point, how much doubt was there? And did the MBA help or fester your doubt?
Yeah, great question. So first, I'm not done yet. And the stories, we have not made it yet. So there's still a lot to be done, Steve. But thank you for the encouragement in here. Maybe, what I learned from my MBA is different than what I thought I would learn from MBA. So I did my MBA about 3 years after college. Now, granted, I did 2 college degrees, and not by choice. I did my first engineering degree in Beirut, got kidnapped by the Syrian, got evacuated to Cyprus, lived a year in Cyprus, had to seek a visa in France. The only way to do this was to go after a second engineering degree. So I had 2 engineering degrees at the end. And then I started working for GE. So I graduated in 93, and then in 96, I did my MBA. So 3 years after working for GE. During those 3 years with GE, plus 1 year of internship, so 4 years total, I got promoted twice, and I was running a group of 23 engineers as the manager of the digital subsystems of the X-ray systems. When I went to my MBA, I thought, all right, I will learn how, to do accounting, how to do marketing, how to develop business plans, what's this thing called entrepreneurship, and so forth. Where I actually learned the most were the soft skills. The 5 sources of power, the art of negotiation. I tell you, the negotiation class I did during my MBA, I've used every single moment in my life, some of the lessons. For example, how to turn a single dimensional win-lose situation into a 2-dimensional win-win situation using the Israeli-Egyptian negotiation tactic developed in the 70s. Phenomenal course. I still apply every single day. Whenever I'm in a situation I'm negotiating with a party, first thought is, okay, how do I turn the single line negotiation where if I win, they lose, to a 2-dimension negotiation where I may lose the less valuable element to me, but win the more valuable element, and vice versa. So we go up, both win-win situation. Organizational behavior. That's a class when I went into my MBA, it's like, shoot, who's going to do an OB right now? I learned a ton in there. And that was phenomenal. So any here college student looking at the classes right now, don't underestimate the impact that you would need, because as a CEO, you probably will have a very solid CFO who's super strong in numbers, in modeling, in finance, in accounting. But where you need to be is understand what is the right team that you'll build together, what's the right organizational structure, how do you motivate them, how do you establish a mission, a vision, where you can run an organization where you cannot talk with every single employee every single day. And Stephen, I did not expect this when I started my MBA a year later. I did not expect this will be the most useful, but now when I look back 20 years, actually 25 years later, it's surprising.
Well, that's a tremendous. It's great to see that we still have those courses on there that valuable, because that's normally. I mean, I know negotiation is powerful, but I never really. That's actually a really great observation. So here's another question I have, and I'll hand the baton back to Tom. So
Wi-Fi in the British Virgin Islands. I'll go ahead. Here's a Steve question that he and I talked about, and it's not the one he was about to ask, but I'll ask a Steve question, and that is, from a talent standpoint, you are in another phase now where you have resources. There's more to do, as you've mentioned at CVRx. You're going to be adding people over time. What types of skills and talents are you most looking for, and what are the hardest ones to find right now?
Yeah. So Tom, it's a great question. Again, here's another example where you need to look at this from a two-dimensional perspective, not a single-dimensional perspective. So you need to look at the domain expertise and the potential. And sometimes you find people who are very high on the domain expertise, but where the potential is limited. You may need skills like this to build your company. But where in the long run you would benefit the most is bringing those raw talents that have the highest potential possible, even if they don't have the domain expertise yet. Take somebody who's curious, somebody who's motivated, energized, full of energy, smart. They can learn the domain. The opposite is harder. You cannot teach energy. You cannot, you know what I'm saying? You cannot teach passion. Yep. And if you don't see the spark in the eye of that person, that passion about, okay, I'm here to change the world. I want to impact thousands and thousands of patients. I cannot do this if I become a doctor, but I can do this if I join a company like CVRx. You want to see that spark. And that for me is more important than any other attributes that you look at. Now, when you're a startup, sometimes you don't have that luxury of waiting 1 year or 2 years for the smart, passionate, energetic young talent to develop the domain expertise. So you go for the skills, for the know-how, the knowledge. But you need to always balance this. You have to have both in a good organization. That's my perspective on it.
Got it. We'll go back to a Tom question then, and that would be, Steve called it tenacity. You and I have had discussions where we call it persistence, number of ways of describing this. But if you were at Medtronic, if this were a project at Medtronic and it had hit a wall, the project team dissolves and reforms in one or more other projects, and you keep going. You're not spending half of your time trying to raise money. It's, at least today, the resources is not something that's limiting a J&J or a Medtronic or an Abbott. What was it that kept you going over 20 years, where you said it was hard? It is hard to let people go, to downsize, especially in a startup. It's hard no matter what, but especially in a startup, because they took risk, right, to come work with you. Mm-hmm. And now that risk didn't work out. What was it that kept you going? What's the difference between that list of 20 things that keep you up at night on a startup versus the comfort of Big Blue?
Tom, I have an extreme respect for a company like Medtronic. I still actually, I don't know if people can see it, the medallion is right behind me on the table. I still have it right in the center of the table. And I believed in the mission that Earl Bakken drafted for Medtronic. They're still alive 67 years later. It's a phenomenal company. But CVRx is different. Let me give you one example. And I think the audience in here will derive, will contrast and compare. When Medtronic failed a trial that wrapped a muscle around the heart and stimulated electrically, they went and explanted patients. Some patients were benefiting from that approach. End of the program, it did not meet the criteria, it did not succeed the trial, it's end of it. We went and treated 322 subjects in hypertension, so patients, with our first generation device. So those patients put their life at risk, trusted us, get our device. FDA concluded our device is not safe. We failed the endpoint. We should explant all of the patients. That was the FDA of 2010, very different than FDA of 2022. So FDA said, you have to go and explant every single patient. I said no. I fought with FDA 6 months until FDA agreed that for patients who met strict criteria of safety and efficacy on one-by-one basis, they will continue with the device, otherwise the device is explanted. We end up more than 80% of the patients meeting this criteria. FDA was surprised by the number of patients who not only met the criteria, but decided to stay with the program. Second came the time to replace their battery when the battery depletes. FDA said, no, you explant the device. I said, yes, we have to replace the batteries. Went through the same fight. And not only this, we went and paid for the battery and for the surgery for every patient based on our commitment, because we told them we'll keep paying for it until their product is FDA approved. And every year, this would cost a small company like CVRx $3, $4, $5 million. Our investors, our board, our employees, myself, we didn't flinch. We did it. Show me another company, small or big, that did something like this, not leaving a patient behind. A few years later, we said, okay, 2013, I told you about the financing difficult situation for CVRx. I had nightmares. What if we can't fund the company? Who will help those patients? Who's going to be here to help David and John and Edith and all of those patients that we got to know by name? Nobody. So I went to the FDA and argued that these patients deserve to have the humanitarian device exemption for the product. So first, it's a orphan condition, and there is a plausibility of effect because we went through this very strict criteria of responders before we allowed them to continue. FDA was shocked that we're asking for this. Nobody ever asked for this. We fought them, we showed them in the statute that this meets the criteria, we got it. So by December 2014, our product received an FDA approval for replacement. So now we can get payers to help us cover some of this cost. And if CVRx goes down, somebody will pick this up because there is money to be made. And therefore those patients can still receive the therapy, they benefit from it. So yes, we're different. We took this maybe to an extreme, but it's about the passion we have for every single one of those patients. We don't want to let anybody behind. And it's a hard one. When you have to make a decision between laying off your friends or being able to continue to treat those patients. And you tell your friend, sorry, Tom, I have to ask you to leave. Sorry, John, I have to ask you to leave. But those patients kept receiving the therapy. Sorry about this. I still have a tremendous respect for Medtronic, for every single employee there, but I think we're a small notch above this right now.
Steve, if it's okay with you, we're going to go off recording, but just hand the baton over to you, and we'll continue with the Q&A, and then let in the rest of the audience as far as questions as well. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine, Tom. I think you actually asked the question I was going to ask anyway, which is what keeps you up at night. So I think once I asked that academia question, clearly you know, some IP address shut me down, so I feel sensitive. So let's Jessica, let's go officially off the record again.